I'm going to explain in detail the information included in and the results of this study, which basically sought to determine what mechanical loading does to tendons. So tendons transmit forces from muscles to bone to enable movement. During a stretch-shorten movement, tendons will store and release elastic energy. This augments the power that is generated by the muscle, reduces muscular effort, and decreases injury risk. So this paper reviewed 61 studies of 763 participants, specifically for Achilles and patellar tendon adaptation, comparing resistance training, aerobic training, and jump training for results. Before explaining the results, I'm going to need to define some terms. First, we have strain. This defines any scenario where the tendon is forced to change its length relative to its original state. It's basically like stretching your upper band. It's listed in terms of percentage in the study compared to an increase from original length. So an original length might be something like this, and an increase in strain might look something like this. Second, we have stress. This defines the amount of force placed onto the tendon in relation to its cross-sectional area. So basically, the more space the actual tendon occupies in a given area, the less stress that a given force will place onto that tendon. Third, we have stiffness. This is a measure of the ability of the tendon to resist a change in length per a given force. Tendon stiffness is commonly debated in the area of strength and conditioning and rehab. This is one reason I really wanted to make this video. I hope to shed some light on what tendon stiffness actually means and how to most practically train it. Here's 4 different scenarios to help explain this. So when forces are high, but length remains stable, stiffness is measured as high. When forces are low, but length is still stable, the measure of stiffness is lower. And when forces are high and the length is changing, stiffness then gets lower. And when forces are low and length is changing, then stiffness is lowest. So tendon stiffness is a function of maintaining a relative length. It's dependent on the position of your sport, of your activity, or whatever that you're doing. Stiffer tendons lead to greater rates of force development, faster sprint times, improved running economy, and reduced risk of tendon damage. Tendons that can't develop stiffness will force the joint to rely more on the muscles around the area. Less tendon stiffness requires more muscle stiffness. This will lead to less fluidity and more wasted energy because you can't spring off of the ground. Fourth and finally, we have modulus. This is similar to stiffness, but it differs in that it describes how individual tendon cells are moving under load. Modulus answers this question: can the tendon at the cellular level resist strain? While stiffness is more so of a global picture, it answers, can the entire tendon at the organ level resist strain? So cellular modulus can lead to better global tendon stiffness, but global stiffness does not always mean better cellular tendon stiffness. I had a whole whale of a time trying to describe these and define these myself. Google was good for some things, so check the description for what sources I found that helped me to wrap my brain around this. But now that you know what strain, stress, stiffness, and modulus are, the following study results should not sound like gibberish. And if they do sound like gibberish, just leave a comment below and I'll try to answer you back shortly. So a meta-analysis of all the included studies revealed that mechanical loading onto the patellar or Achilles tendon induced moderate increases in stiffness, large increases in modulus, and small increases in cross-sectional area, which confirms the results from 2 prior systematic reviews that totaled 56 studies. Specifically, resistance training was what led to increases in stiffness by increasing resistance to strain at the cellular level of the resistance training protocols. The ones that included high tendon strains promoted the greatest increase in tendon modulus and stiffness versus low tendon strains. So for the Achilles, it might look something like this, where we're getting some stretch in that back Achilles, but this might look like a little bit more strain. The exercises that these different studies utilize were heterogeneous, meaning they're different exercises, so it doesn't necessarily have to be this one, but frankly, what they measured was that the exercises that they used endured more strain. They found that those were the ones that led to the greatest increases in stiffness. It's thought that the rationale for this is that it induces anabolic gene expression in the tendon. It creates new collagen, removes old collagen for the purpose of creating stiffness. Again, stiffness development occurs with strain by performing movements that force the tendon to endure higher levels of strain, not shying away from strain. That's the exact stimulus the tendon uses to develop stiffness for athletic movements. So at least when I was in school, the thought process to increase tendon stiffness was by first doing things that require the tendon to exhibit that stiffness. And plyometrics was the first line of attack in relation to this quality. I'm not saying that plyometrics don't have a time and a place. You still want the tendon to practice demonstrating those stiffness qualities, not to mention the actual skill involved in coordinating your body to utilize its tendons in sport practice. But to actually develop stiffness, you need to place the tendons in situations that challenge its stiffness. Remember, stiffness is a quality where the tendon maintains a given length even while under strain. So to increase stiffness capability of a tendon, you're going to want to challenge it under strain. So in future bouts, the tendon will develop cells and a collagenous environment that is able to create active stiffness the next time that tendon is forced into that position again. Another thought in school was in regards to static stretching, that it isn't good for tendons to stretch them out. More range would lead to more susceptibility to injury per that theory. There could be some truth to that. I wouldn't want to just make all my tendons and ligaments loosey-goosey in the names of getting more mobility, but the notion that a little static stretching is going to ruin your tendons is just a farce. It would take gymnastic level, hours of stretching per day to get to a level where you didn't have control in these ranges. And even then, as long as you're still actively contracting the muscles around those areas in those positions, you're not going to get tendon compliance. You're going to get active stiffness development because you're signaling to the cells behind, in front, and all around that joint that you not only want range in those positions, but you want control in those positions. Stiffness does not mean tightness. I don't want tendon stiffness because of stiff joints. I want tendon stiffness because of elite activation at all ranges of the ankle that has been developed precisely and intently at the cellular level. You don't attain that by shying away from strain. So how does this compare to jump-based training? Resistance training and jump-based interventions induce large and small increases respectively in tendon stiffness. Resistance training was the only intervention type to increase modulus and cross-sectional area. Resistance training was nearly 2 times the effect of jump training in stiffness development. Okay, so let's break that down. Stiffness is the ability of the tendon to maintain a given length even with an outside force. Modulus is the ability of tendon cells specifically to maintain a length even with an outside force. Jump-based training did not bring clear changes to tendon modulus, but did increase tendon stiffness. Why might that be the case? My hypothesis on the stiffness changes would just be the neuromuscular adaptations that occur from the skill practice of jumping. True, it was found even in drop jump movements of unknown heights, where basically each rep was a new stimulus. They changed the height of the box and they had the people drop jump and jump back up off of them. They found that tendon compliance was higher because of the new stimulus. So comparatively, jump training is a skill itself. It takes full body coordination, timing, and execution. And if it's a new stimulus, the body will adapt not just the tendon, but the entire continuity from brain to tendon to perform the movement more effectively. So it's possible to increase this tendon stiffness while not increasing the cellular stiffness to the same magnitude. The limiting factor in jump training is more neuromuscular. The goal is to jump, sprint, or throw to the highest, fastest, or farthest capability, and that takes immense activation of your central nervous system. That's the SAID principle, specific adaptation to imposed demand. The imposed demand is jump as high as you can off of one leg, and the specific adaptation is greater neuromuscular control of the entire lower limb, reflecting itself in greater global stiffness from head to toe. The general adaptation to the skill of jumping can include that tendon stiffness. That's still on that line from head to toe, but that stiffness does not mean it's coming from the tendon itself. Remember, there's neuromuscular interactions that interplay here from brain to muscle to tendon all the way through. The imposed demand in this case is not tendon strain. Therefore, the specific adaptation is not increased modulus, just increased stiffness. Modulus is local adaptation at the cellular level. Stiffness is global adaptation for greater control at the organ level. The application is that you don't want to leave out resistance training in lieu of developing stiff tendons. You're leaving out crucial parts of your development. One argument could be that the forces are not as large as jumping or sprinting, so how can it ever cause adaptation? Just check this out. Due to the viscoelastic properties of the extracellular matrix, tendons deform more and therefore absorb more energy at low compared to high strain rates. As a consequence, longer duration contractions at any given load may augment the transmission of external tendon strain to the mechanosensitive tendon cells, which would be expected to promote greater anabolic responses. The relatively brief contact times and greater rates of tendon loading associated with plyometric activity may not provide an optimal stimulus for adaptation. In support of this, studies that directly compared the effects of sustained loading, that is, concentric or eccentric or isometric interventions, to jump-based activity, only observed increased tendon stiffness in the former. So adaptation to the tendon does not necessarily occur in direct relation to forces experienced by the entire body. The tendon is a force sensor itself. Strain, percentage, and rate are its primary means of adaptation. Strain is crucial for tendons. What isn't as crucial? There is evidence to suggest that resistance training performed using all contraction modes of all durations, of high or low intensity, and of high or low volume elicit clear but similar increases in tendon stiffness. What was important? When the resistance training was paired with running or with cycling, that is aerobic activity, there was a blunting in tendon adaptation, which means no change in tendon property was observed. That's moderate change from the resistance training protocol to nothing with this combined protocol. The thing to consider from a training philosophy standpoint is the error of trying to do too much of everything. You'll never know what training modality is leading to your development if you're training 7 days a week, if you're running miles, if you're doing gassers and training to exhaustion in the name of mental toughness. Remember, specific adaptation to imposed demand. The imposed demand we're looking for in this case, in this paper, is greater athletic potential by increasing tendon stiffness. This takes patience. You can be increasing this stiffness potential from this paper starting as early as 4 weeks and continue, as we have seen on the ATG program, for an indefinite amount of time afterwards. The old adage, work smarter, not harder, is in play. It's a patient route, but it's an assured route. Training the structure to be able to tolerate greater yields of sprint, jump, or sport-specific skill work is the best way to ensure a two-way relationship. As the central nervous system improves, so ought the structure be able to handle it. You need to increase your capability to handle force so that what you do increase in your central nervous system won't damage you. Greater electric output does not mean greater tendon development, but greater tendon development means your body will trust itself to output more electric to that joint.